I'm going to be handing it over to Barb, who is going to be our primary presenter today. So take it away, Barb.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And thank you to everyone for coming today. I'm sure you all have very, very busy schedules, but I appreciate the time we will have together to talk about some different behavior strategies. Um, as they mentioned, Amy already mentioned, these are not meant to be specific clinical or medical advice we're giving you for your child. But my hope is you might hear about some strategies that you feel like, oh, that might work in my family, and also give you an overview of what would be covered in behavior therapy, if you haven't done that yet, or what is sometimes called parent training. I always like to preface that by saying, of course, you all know how to be parents. If you are here in the role as a parent, parent training, if you hear other professionals use that, basically means training parents in the behavioral skills that the professionals know. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So there's a couple different topics we're gonna cover today. We're gonna talk about behavioral principles, which is basically understanding kind of the chain of events of behavior and thinking about the functions of behavior. And then we're going to talk about some different prevention strategies. You know, just like going to get your flu shot, I'm a big believer that preventing a problem is way easier than dealing with it once it is a problem. And then we are also going to talk about use of daily schedules as another intervention that can be helpful sometimes. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So this might be aging me. I don't know if any of you know Calvin and Hobbes, just a little cartoon here that really reflects how I always felt as a parent. My children are adults now, but Calvin's saying, what assurance do I have that your parenting isn't screwing me up? As a parent, I always thought about that. I would love to give all of you permission, at least for the next hour, to go guilt-free and know that we're all doing the best we can to figure out the right fit, the right types of strategies for your kids. And sometimes what works for one child isn't going to work for another child, even within the same family. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So again, my goal for today is definitely not to talk about anything that's right or wrong in terms of parenting strategies, but some evidence-based strategies that you might find helpful in managing some of the behavioral struggles that can co-occur along with autism. The program we're going to talk about was designed for children with autism, but I will say the strategies are also very helpful with children with other neurodevelopmental conditions. Evidence-based means it has been really well researched and shown to be effective most of the time. You know, the analogy I like to give is when my kids were little, if I went to the pediatrician, they had strep throat and they said, hey, here's the antibiotic that works 90% of the time. We know it really well. It's been researched really well. Or there's this new one that looks cool. You can try it. We don't really know much about it. I'm choosing the one that has been well researched. So this is a similar sort of take here for this type of therapy. And I think I've already said the disclaimer, please, please, please consult with a licensed professional to help implement these strategies, especially in very challenging situations. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So what we're going to talk about today, and in the next few ECHO sessions that are behaviorally focused, we're going to talk about this program that you will hear us call the Ruby Parent Training Program. Ruby stands for Research Units in Behavioral Intervention. I did not develop this program. I just happen to be a psychologist that uses it a lot. In the program itself, there are 11, you can see, core sessions here, and we're going to kind of go over the content from about 3 of them today. There are additional sessions. I put this on here just so you're aware, if you decide to connect with someone to do this treatment, what you might be able to focus on. But again, we're going to give you a nice overview today. So let's go ahead to the next slide. All right. So the goal of this Ruby Parent Training intervention is twofold. One, to reduce challenging behaviors. What does that mean? Non-compliance or not following directions, tantrums, aggression, self-injurious behavior, trouble with transitions in the daily routine. It can also be used to increase adaptive skills. What do we mean by that? Appropriate behaviors, socially appropriate behaviors, or self-care, increasing what the child can do for themselves to increase independence. So let's go ahead to the next slide. We are also going to talk a little bit at the end of today, and I have a few slides that will show you little examples from an app that was developed that goes along with the Ruby curriculum. It's called the Attend Behavior app. It's available to families on both Apple and Android devices. And again, it is based on the Ruby content, but designed for families to go through on their own, do some self-paced learning. So we'll talk about that more later, but wanted to mention it now because I'll direct your attention to a few pictures from the app when we get into a little bit more of the content. Okay, next slide. So, facts of behavior. This is an important kind of underlying fundamental of this model, is that all behaviors are learned. Now, I want to qualify that. What does that mean? Does that mean someone has taught their child, to headbang, to hit others? No. It just means that sometimes the situation or things in the environment have occurred, maybe without anyone's knowledge, where the child has learned, hey, this behavior is working for me. And so part of our goal is to really figure out, okay, why is the child doing this? And can we teach them new behaviors to still get what they need? So let's go ahead to the next slide. This is the model that you will hear behavior therapists or ABA therapists talk about, called the ABC model. And it's a way to think about what is the chain of events and where can we intervene when you have a behavior you would like to change. My guess is if there's a behavior you'd like to change in your child, like don't hit, you've probably said that many times, and that doesn't usually change behavior. So just so you all are aware of the language that therapists will use, and you might see it if you decide to try the app, antecedents stand for things that happen before the behavior. The behavior is whatever it is that you've seen that you're concerned about. And then consequence could be something that you're doing on purpose. Like here's the consequence for that behavior, but it could just be something that happens naturally in response to the behavior. And so where do we intervene if we want to change behavior? We intervene at the antecedent level or the consequence level. Today, we're going to focus on things we can do at the antecedent level before the behavior occurs. So we call those often antecedent management strategies. I often also call them prevention strategies. So let's go ahead to the next slide. One of the really important things to think about when you want to think about how can I best manage this behavior is to think about the function of the behavior. I had said a few minutes ago, behaviors usually occur because they work for some way in the child, although it may not be working for anyone else. Especially if you have a child maybe that's hitting, maybe they hit a sibling because the sibling took their toy. Maybe the sibling then drops the toy and the child gets their toy back. So it's working for them, but obviously that's not working for the sibling, for the family. And so it can be really helpful to think through what is the function of the behavior, and you have 4 possible functions listed here. The first one is escape or avoidance. Basically, this means trying to get out of a situation, something they don't want to do. So if you have a child that tantrums every time you say, okay, time to get in the bathtub, that tantrum might be because they are trying to avoid. They don't want to take a bath. Attention seeking is pretty much what it sounds like. A behavior often happens to get attention or even a reaction from someone, and sometimes that can be even negative attention. The third function is to get what the child wants. Sometimes we call this a tangible function. They want something. I want that toy. I want to watch this show. The fourth function is something that can be automatically rewarding, meaning the child's engaging in the behavior because it feels good. Sometimes you'll also hear this called kind of a sensory function. People sometimes use different language around that. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So just to kind of review, this might help you remember it. An escape maintained behavior, meaning the function of the behavior is to escape, is to get away from something the child does not like, a place, a task, a person. Tangible is get what I want. I want a toy, food, video. Attention is I really want someone to be paying attention to me right now. And automatic is I like how that feels. Just as an example, in case that's confusing, it could be that a self-stimulatory behavior could be hand flapping, could be just this just feels good right now. That's why I do it. I don't do it to get attention from anyone, not trying to get out of anything. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So this is one of the examples from the Attend Behavior app, just to show you how it's trying to teach some of these concepts. And I just thought I would include it here just to make sure all of this is making sense so far. So it tells you that the antecedent is that Ryan is given a turkey sandwich for lunch. The behavior is that Ryan falls to the floor and screams, "I want Pop-Tarts." And then the consequence is his mother takes the sandwich away and starts toasting some Pop-Tarts. So if you were going through the app to learn some of this, it would have you pick, what do you think the function of the behavior is? And in this example, I would say it's most likely tangible. It was to get what he wanted. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to go one slide ahead, just trying to save our time. Let's go one more. Okay, here is an example of if people ever tell you to collect some data about your child's behavior, this is probably what they're referring to. If you can track the antecedents, the behaviors, the consequences, and some of the other material you see on the sheet here, this is a pretty busy sheet. Not all data tracking has to look like this. But it can be really helpful for you as a parent to start to think about, are there patterns? Are there certain times of day, certain settings? Are there certain antecedents that seem to always trigger a behavior? And you will also be tracking the functions that might tell you, wow, I've been ignoring a lot of behavior because I thought it was to seek attention. But it turns out, looks like most of my child's behaviors, the function seems to be to get what they want. So it can just be helpful to help you make the most educated attempts at what kind of strategies you're going to use. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So what we're going to move into now is some actual strategies. What are some of those prevention strategies that you can use, if not to try to prevent, or at least minimize some of the behavioral issues? The Ruby program divides these up into 8 categories. That's what's listed there. I do not think we will have time to cover every one of them today, but I wanted you to see the categories and also realize that under each category, there are many, many ways to implement these. So you really have a lot of room to try lots of different things under these strategies to try to find something your child might respond to. We're going to go through some of them in the next couple slides, but no, this is something you can also learn more about in that Attend Behavior app. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. So here's an example of one of the categories, avoiding situations or people. This basically means if you have learned there are certain situations or people that your child's definitely going to have some behavioral challenges in. You can avoid it, maybe not forever, but in the short term, as you're trying to get a handle on some of the behaviors. So this obviously might not always be a long-term solution, but it may help with certain situations. So the picture I have on there alludes to going to the store, which can be really hard for a lot of families. There is, sometimes going to the store is hard for me. There's a lot of lights, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of sounds, there's a lot going on. And for some children with autism, that can be pretty overwhelming. And so some families have decided, you know what, I'm not going to go to Walmart on a Saturday. Or they decide, I'm not going to go when I have a full a full list of groceries to get. I might take my child when I have one thing to get or two things to get. So just an example of how you might use this particular category. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Small doses is one of my favorite strategies, and it basically means giving your child either experiences or tasks in very small increments that they might be better able to handle so they are not feeling overwhelmed. So the pictures I have here are first one's about taking a road trip. A 12-hour drive in the car with a child with autism that does not like being strapped in their car seat, you might need to break that up into smaller increments if you can, because then the child might be able to be successful for, say, 2 to 3 hours, and then we stop at a rest stop and the child can run around, burn off some energy, just as an example. Again, how you implement this will be different for every family. The baseball picture there, I have seen many a child that gets bored, especially at young children's baseball games. And so maybe you decide, you know what, we're going to take our child to our older son's baseball game, but after about 15 minutes, one of the parents is going to take this younger child for a walk, because I know sitting there much longer than that is going to be hard. And I want my child to be successful in these settings. So it's basically breaking things down into much smaller steps. And the hope would be, if your child does well or does better, you get some confidence and you can start stretching things into longer periods of time. All right, let's go to the next slide. Changing the order of events. Also love this one because it's usually things you as a family are already doing. So you're really, in this one, we're not asking parents to do anything new. We're just saying maybe switch up the order of how certain things go in your day. So this is a little cartoon from that app I keep mentioning. I should say I have no financial affiliation with the app. I just think it's helpful. So the example here, the mom's saying, okay, it's time to turn off your iPad and get ready for school. And the child says, I don't want to get ready for school, 10 more minutes. So in the second part, they've changed the order where the mom's saying, okay, go get dressed for school, then you can get on your iPad. The child's saying, okay, mom. Now, it might not always go this smoothly, but think about if you have certain times a day, if you've tracked your data on that sheet, or if you just know, oh, mornings are always rough. Oh, bedtime's always rough. Maybe you decide, you know what? We're going to change it up. We're going to do bath time in the morning instead of at night, because nights, my child's tired, they're irritable. I'm tired, I'm irritable. Just as an example of how you change the order of events. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This can be really helpful as well, changing how you ask. Now, this can include a variety of things. Some of you may have children where they react really strongly to the word no. I had a child like this. They hear the word no, and it's just like this whole physiological response. They're automatically angry and upset. And so, for example, maybe you don't say no. And that's how you respond, I should say. This covers how you ask things or how you respond. So maybe instead of saying no, you say, sure, you can have a cookie as soon as you eat dinner. This example from the app is talking about giving choices. And I'm guessing lots of you do that already. So the mom in the first part is saying, what do you want for breakfast? And the child says cookies. And the mom says, nope, can't have cookies for breakfast. And then the child's very upset. I want cookies. Maybe you change how you ask in the second example. And mom says, would you like waffles or a bowl of cereal? And the child says cereal. Often giving the child, being able to empower them to make a choices that you feel like are both acceptable, can be very helpful. I would include in this, just as another way to think about, okay, how can I give directions or tasks in a different way? A lot of you probably give warnings for transitions, like, hey, in 5 minutes, we got to turn off the TV, get ready to go. So giving some of those warnings is another way to kind of just change how you're asking your child to do things. All right, let's go to the next slide. Uh, this one is responding to early signs of the problem. This can be really helpful if you have a child that maybe goes, what a lot of parents tell me, they go from 0 to 100. You know, when I ask them to do something and then the picture of the Hulk, they're super angry. But there might be some signs along the way that you can respond to. Like parents have told me, oh, I see the veins in their neck start to pop up. I know they're getting frustrated. Or, we're at a restaurant, they're getting super antsy, super fidgety. Their face gets red. And the goal would be if you see those early signs, you redirect, you distract them. So if I were at a restaurant and I see early signs of this with my child, I might say, you know what, let's go take a walk. And I would do that before the child starts to engage in behaviors you're hoping to avoid. Distracting the child. If you can see a sibling is, just kind of annoying your child, or this is a tough situation, I might distract the child and say, hey, can you come get the mail with me? Can you do this? Just try to, find that off ramp so that they aren't, headed toward a certain meltdown. You can also alter the task. This definitely doesn't mean every time your child gets upset, you're like, okay, don't have to do it. It basically means change the task to something that seems less overwhelming to the child. So if you said clean your room, for example, and you see the signs coming, you might say, you know what? Let's clean. I'm going to set a timer. Let's clean your room for 3 minutes, see how much we can get done, and then we'll see where we're at then. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So these are one of the categories in the prevention strategies that you saw, talks about using visual or auditory supports. And my guess is many of you on this call have experience with that. So here's an example of some first then boards. I really like these as a first kind of entryway into trying some visuals with a child. And it's basically a way of visually showing a child what is the task demand that you're asking them to do, and what is the fun thing they get to do afterwards. And even if you're saying it, if you just do this, then you can play video games. So that's what the first one would be. If you just do your homework, then you can play video games. Having them pictured like this side by side so the child hears it and sees it can be really helpful for some children. The example on the bottom, first brush your teeth, then we'll read a book. Now, these can be fancy. I see, some families, will print these pictures off and they'll laminate them, and that's great. Honestly, I've seen many families use it successfully using like a dry erase board you can get at the dollar store, or you can do the old-fashioned paper and pencil, and you can just kind of try it out to see if it's something your child will look at. This can also be helpful when children have language delays. I use them. I have families that use them for children that do not have language delays. Again, it's the seeing it and hearing it that can be helpful, but it can be particularly helpful if your child does have some language delays to see it in pictures. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Timers can be another strategy. I talked about kind of giving warnings, but you can also use some timers to help your child move on or transition. Now, you obviously can tell your child it's time to go, but a lot of kids respond really well to something other than their caregiver cueing them, letting them know it's time to move on. Whether that is an audible timer you set, there's a picture of an Alexa device there. Some families will use that. Um, I've had older kids like wear Fitbits and set their own timer so that it vibrates for them, and they know, oh, it's time to move on. So there are definitely many different ways to use these. You can use the good old-fashioned clock on the microwave. And this is where you have to kind of do a little bit of trial and error to see what your child is going to respond to. I've had kids that do not like auditory timers, but if There are visual timers. I mean, you get an old-fashioned egg timer. There are things you can use on the computer, and sometimes kids respond better to those. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Schedules offer an opportunity to use prevention strategies at key time periods throughout your day. So I often recommend that families start by writing out their child's daily schedule. And it might sound a little tedious, but I usually go hour by hour. Tell me what's happening from 8 to 9, what's happening from 9 to 10, what's happening from 10 to 11, because it gives a nice opportunity to see, again, kind of pain points. And then we recommend using some of the prevention strategies we've just talked about, like changing the time of a demand. I mentioned the changing bath time. Maybe making sure you're using fun activities to reward completion of less desired activities. So we're going to go outside, and that's going to come later in the schedule after we've done cleaning up the toys. Can also be really helpful to establish predictable routine. So if you're thinking, well, we don't really have a schedule I could write out like that, for some children with autism, again, there's no one solution for all, but for some, having a very predictable routine can feel very soothing and really help behaviors become more predictable. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. This is an example of some visual schedules that show, it's using those picture cues we talked about, that show the child what to expect. Here's what's going to happen in the morning routine, for example. I know the pictures are a little small. In this particular one, the child, it's using some Velcro that they can take off what they've finished and put it in a finished pocket. You don't have to do it that way. Again, you could just have the schedule printed off so they can check it every day. And I would recommend not making it too complicated. For kids with good language that are older, it could be just a list. It doesn't have to be the pictures. But anything that helps make the day more predictable and lets the child kind of see their progress. Ooh, I got through going to the bathroom. I got through getting dressed. I am almost at TV time. So that's where sometimes this can be helpful. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Oh, we do have a video here. Let's see if it's working. I know we're almost out of time here. Let me show, this is an example of how you might use a video. So you can go ahead and play it.
Okay, you're all done brushing your teeth. Put it in the bag. Very good. Now what do we have to do? Put on coat, okay? So let's go. Take it. All right, let's go put on your coat. Come on, let's go. Good, you put on your coat. Let's put that in the bag. All right, what's next? Put on backpack. Okay, let's go. Come on, let's go put it on.
All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. I did want to mention, if you're thinking, well, of course my child knows the schedule because we do the same thing every day. For children with autism or language delays, for some, it can still be very helpful to have it in that visual format, because there's a whole lot about kind of any kind of language mediated task that can just feel a little overwhelming or sometimes confusing. So even if you as the grown-up are thinking, but this is predictable, they know what's next, I'm telling you, you'd be surprised how many kids seeing it like that, it can just make a difference. All right, so a couple other hints here, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kevin. One of the other things I like to talk about with daily schedules is it can really help to see, is there consistency among family members? Again, making life predictable for your child with autism can be very helpful. And it can just be a way to help communication among family members. So let's go ahead to the next slide. What's your behavior support plan? What does that mean? I'm going to real quickly say it. Let's go to the next slide. It basically means write down what you're using and what's working well, because you might have to come back to it. You can use it like a roadmap of what strategies are working, and you can share it with others. Again, can really help the child if everyone's kind of doing the same thing. Next slide. One more little bit of humor here. Don't we all wish that our kids, we had kind of contracts where you say, oh yeah, your bedtime was in that contract we signed when you were born. Doesn't work that way, but let's go ahead to the next slide. And just a reminder, keep up the great work you're all doing, because as parents, we're all always just doing the best that we can. All right, I'm gonna go to the next slide and pass it off to Kevin.
Thanks, Barb. So, many of you might wonder, why is it so hard to find services? Why is it so hard to get connected to things? Unfortunately, there are lots of reasons that could play into that. Sometimes the treatment protocols, these brilliant researchers come up with these wonderful programs, but they're pretty complex and they require a lot of training, a lot of specialization. And so implementing that in the day-to-day world for people that aren't researchers can take time and can take effort to really get it there. Sometimes people may not get connected to things because they've experienced stigma related to whatever condition, or what other people think of them, or just their own internal expectations for maybe what they should or should not be, and act in different situations and areas. Luckily, the stigma is getting is reducing the more we talk about it and are open about it, but it still can be a barrier. Another barrier to care is a lack of specialists. One reason we are doing this series is to try to share knowledge with a team of us experts, so that it can be more widely available. Let's go on to the next slide. And so in some ways, to overcome some of these barriers, there's some new solutions proposed. Are there ways to simplify the process, simplify the therapy? We want to make sure that we're still getting a good amount of therapy, and simplified therapies that still have really good evidence that they're effective. But are there ways where we can drill down to some of the core elements of it? So that's one way to try to overcome these barriers. Another thing, we've been referencing one possible digital solution to help with this. There are other things as well. I know people are chatting, Canva apps, other things. There's a lot of really cool digital tools today that can help with some of these things that we're talking about. Even a simple to-do app on your phone, or a notes app to track some of the behaviors. Some of those things can be really helpful. And we'll be talking about this in a few months for a series of how to other digital strategies and technologies that can be helpful. And then this last one, task sharing. Does it have to be licensed clinical psychologists that can do this? Or can we train county board workers? Can we train paraprofessionals? Can we train parents to share their knowledge? And, we definitely think that that is true, that, we're all here to learn and grow together. We've had people in the chat sharing their experiences and their expertise. The more that we grow in our skills, the more we can share those really great techniques and strategies with others. Next slide. So a lot of really great resources here. There's the Ruby network, which was part of the original group that developed the Ruby parent training programs. Information about attend behavior. We've put a few notes of this in the chat, but just know that there is a cost associated with attend behavior. It's possible to pay for a subscription. I think it's like $16 a month. We will be, again, in future meetings, we will be sharing other things, apps and resources that are free or have a lower cost. And then for those who are in Ohio, we have a grant from Ohio agency to provide some of those attend behavior resources to families through the county boards of developmental disabilities. So that's an option to reach out to us if you are in Ohio and have questions about that. I'll pass over to Amy for the rest of this slide.
Sorry, I couldn't get my unmute button there. So yeah, we dropped in the chat there the link that if you're in Ohio, you can go ahead and fill that out, and then we will connect you to your Ohio county board member who we're working with, if there is one. Not all counties are involved.